Alright gang, welcome to a new or fresh video here from the Southwest Michigan Gravel Guy. Wanted to take a brief moment to do a kind of a 6-month check-in or review on my Lauf Seigla. I purchased my Seigla new from Lauf in March of 2025. I purchased the race transmission model for, I think it was roughly 5,500-ish, if memory serves, as shipped. So of course that's without any pedals, or, obviously no mounts for your Garmin, no bags, no bottle cages or anything like that. And I did splurge for one of the I guess upgraded, if you will, paint colors. I opted for the green. It's particularly attractive on the Seigla, I think. The bike, from a purchasing standpoint, I think Lauf's website is super easy to navigate, and I particularly enjoy their kind of comparison between models. As somebody who was I would say, purchasing, their first nice bike, it was pretty helpful for me to be able to really compare specs and components. And then go back through and kind of research each of those components and understand the value of the build that I was getting. So, positive experience purchasing from Lauf. The bike did arrive within a week of me purchasing it. If I'm not mistaken, it actually arrived to me on March 13th and was super easy setup. I've not purchased any other kind of, boxed internet bikes before. I imagine setup is similar for most, if not all of them, but you mount on your front wheel, of course, add on some handlebars, charge up a battery for your derailleur, and you just gotta go, obviously assuming you put on some pedals too. So nothing too noteworthy, I wouldn't say, from that experience. Overall, it is positive and easy. Maybe the one unique thing, at least unique from my perception, is that Lauf does include kind of a rudimentary torque wrench with the bike, which is a cheap piece of junk that you'll never use again, but was particularly helpful for me assembling the bike, as of course every nut and bolt and fastener has torque specs, and I don't own a torque wrench, so it was pretty nice to have one and just be able to get started. I mentioned I've had the bike in now for just shy of 6 months, and I've put, last I checked, 6,200, call it 6,250 miles on my Seigla in that time, and really enjoyed it. From a kind of a components standpoint over that time, I will take a moment just to say that I really have enjoyed the tires on the Seigla. The Goodyear connectors, the 50 millimeter version, really have been a super nice kind of all-around tire for me. They have enough grip that they do fine in gravel. 50 millimeters is plenty enough that it does okay in a lot of decently chunky stuff. The bike does tend to get left behind in some of the really rough Michigan sand. There's definitely some sandy washout spots you can get in the drier months here in Southwest Michigan, in Berry County, maybe over in Johnstown Township. And then I also ride up in the Leelanau Peninsula fairly regularly, and there are definitely some sandy spots there up on some of the kind of seasonal roads in the peninsula. Koverick, I think Morio Road is up there and can be pretty gnarly. And the bike will definitely get bogged down, but that's not really a problem with the bike or with those tires specifically. That's just the terrain. Some of the other components on the bike, obviously you have, at the race transmission model, you have the SRAM Eagle XO derailleur cassette, and of course matching flat top chain. You've got the Axis wireless shifters, and then a single-sided power meter. For all of those components, I've been really quite impressed, at least for, I guess, the drivetrain and the shifters. I've been really impressed. The speed of the shifting is fantastic. The accuracy of the shifting is really, really pleasant. And I find it's been a big relief for me to not have to worry about the shifters. I don't have to worry about cables, don't have to worry about tension on cables. That's been really pleasant. Additionally, those shifters are very easy to use and very comfortable. At 6,250 miles, give or take, I have worn out the cassette at this point. In chatting with my local bike shop, they advised, maybe 4,000 miles, 5,000 miles is expected on a cassette. I've always cleaned the bike really well, but I've never changed the chain. My chain at this point is probably stretched by about a 1/4 inch, and my cassette is definitely worn down, so I will be replacing that. On the topic of components and the power meter, I will be upfront. The power meter is not something that I use. Full disclosure, I've never connected any of the components of this bike to the app. I'm a bit of a Luddite in that I don't, I avoid using apps when I can. I'm not interested in connecting things. The Internet of Things and, having every single piece of my kit connected digitally is just not something that's super enticing to me. So I have not ever used the power meter. And to be frank, I don't think that I'm a good enough or competent or capable enough cyclist that something like a power meter really would add a lot of value to my experience. From a component standpoint, otherwise, the bike includes the Lauf's own smoothie bars, and then, of course, the Lauf fork, which is kind of the big deal. And then, aside from those two things, probably the last major piece of componentry to mention are the E13 carbon wheels. I really enjoy the carbon wheels, although, again, maybe not, needed for my caliber of cycling. And I also really enjoy the fork. The smoothie bars, to be honest, are something that I would say I'm not entirely sold on. While they are comfortable, the hoods are comfortable, the flare is about what I would like it to be, and the hand positions are comfortable. I don't find that the smoothie bars, quote, eat the vibrations the way that Lauf maybe claims that they do. There's some particularly rough washboards in the Barry County area. Off the top of my head, I think Manning Lake Road is one that is just notorious, at least in my head, for having some of the worst washboard imaginable. But even some of the other roads, Lennar, Trick, Stuck, that oftentimes have really gnarly washboards, I just don't find that it makes that big of a difference with these handlebars compared to others that I've ridden. So I don't know if that's maybe just a perception in my head, or if I'm being kind of unfair, or if it's reality. I don't know, but I found myself multiple times while riding the Seigla thinking like, I'm not really sure that these bars are all that they're kind of trying to advertise them to be. I do, however, absolutely love the suspension fork on the Lauf. I'm not a heavy nor a large rider by any stretch of the imagination, maybe 160 to 170 pounds, but I feel like I tend to ride very heavily on the bike, meaning that I don't tend to, I tend to stay pretty firmly planted on the bike, firmly on the pedals, firmly on the bars, firmly on the seat, a lot of, obviously, just pressure, force, and weight down on the bike. So when I hit bumps, I tend to feel it a lot in my wrists, in my hands, in my neck. And the fork absolutely has helped to smooth a lot of that out. Overall, I do think that the race transmission is a good value for the components. I would say that kind of phrasing, though, to me, is contingent on you being a rider who will take advantage of all of those. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't use the power meter. I likely can't tell the difference between the XO cassette and whatever the next lower or next closest tier is. And I'm not sure that every ounce and gram that's been saved on this particular model is really something that I've needed. I would say it's something that I've enjoyed as a luxury as I've ridden. I'll also say, I initially was pretty nervous about the electronic shifting. I would say I had a lot of range anxiety. However, I would say that those kind of fears have been pretty firmly quelled. In the maybe 6,200 miles that I've put on the bike, I'm maybe changing my derailleur batteries every 7 to 1,100 miles. And I've also had no challenges with moisture, which is one of my other concerns on the Seigla, is that electronic shifting, I just wasn't sure how that was going to interact with, rain, riding through puddles, etc. And I would say that by now the bike has seen plenty of drizzle, sprinkling, rain, and in one situation that I would definitely classify as downpour. And I'm pretty confident by now that the bike will be A-okay through each of those situations. I certainly wouldn't submerge the bike or ride it through, anything that's going to, go over the derailleur. However, I've had no issues whatsoever with any of the components getting wet. I've cleaned the bike many times. I clean the bike probably on average every 250 to 300 miles in that maybe, once a week or so time frame, always with the cover over the derailleur, and have never had any challenges whatsoever with moisture, which has been, I would say, pleasing to me. From a geometry perspective and just an overall fit perspective, again, at kind of that 160 pounds, 5'7", 5'8" range, I went with a small, and it fits me quite well. The bike does have, kind of that race-oriented geometry. It's small, it's aggressive, it's tight, and that's what I wanted in a bike. So I would say from that perspective, it is a good fit and, kind of really quite a functional bike in that perspective. That said, I have consistently over the summer pushed the range and duration of my rides up into the 50, 60, 70 mile and beyond, including a couple of centuries. And sometimes I would say I'm left wondering whether or not this is the right bike for those rides. Being of pretty aggressive geometry after, very long rides, the bike is not always the most comfortable. But that's, maybe more on my choice in bike and my choice in my riding style than it is on the bike. And, to that point, I'm a pretty big believer in using the bike that you have. I think the best bike to go ride is whatever one you already own. So I'll continue to hammer out the miles on this thing, regardless of whether or not it is quote unquote the right bike. I think my biggest gripe overall with the Seigla, to be honest, is the bars. Maybe it's because that part of what I was really looking for in a gravel bike was an upgrade to the comfort of my hands, and to my wrists and kind of palms. My previous bike that I was riding kind of in this use case was a 1998, I think it was, Cannondale R300 aluminum road bike that I had put 28 millimeter, Pan Racer Gravel King tires on. It was an extremely rough bike. It had come out of a dumpster prior to my getting it. So I was really looking for something that would be much easier on the hands, and maybe I had outsized expectations for what this bike could ultimately deliver. But I don't feel like this truly kind of eats the vibrations or delivered on the advertised kind of comfort component from a handlebar side of things. The other note is I might put a larger chain ring on in the future. Like I said, at 6,200 and some change miles, I'm currently having the chain and the cassette replaced. However, in evaluating the cassette for wear, you can absolutely see that the lowest three gears, or my three top gears, highest speed gears, have the vast majority of wear on them. I tend to hang out in those three gears the most, which to me is maybe indicating that I'm not using the full cassette enough. So I tend to be in the 14 to 17 mile per hour range in terrain with 30 to 50 feet of elevation gain per mile, so kind of that rolling hill territory. So I'm not a great cyclist by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm very clearly not using the full cassette, which is probably not helpful for overall life of the bike. That said, 6,200 miles. No service whatsoever outside of my routine cleaning with, some wire brushes and a garden hose and Dawn dish soap. I don't think I can complain about wearing out a cassette at this point. I probably could have changed the chain multiple times and gotten a little bit longer out of the cassette, but riding all weather, I think I've ridden the bike almost every single day since I purchased it, right up until I took it to the shop last week. And I think that's a fairly respectable performance. It's really been a pretty enjoyable bike for me. I haven't ridden a lot of other bikes. Like I mentioned, my previous kind of bike for this use case was a Cannondale R300, very much an old school bike. I have ridden, various, Facebook Marketplace road bikes, old giant OCRs, and I have, folks that I ride with that have various different gravel bikes, and this one by far fits me the best out of anything that I've ever tested or ridden. And it's just a very enjoyable bike to ride. It feels good to ride, even as, sometimes I get up into that 50, 60, 70 mile range and my hands start to get a little less comfortable. Oftentimes I can get down into the drops for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, even up to 10 miles and really change up my hand position, and that will help to remediate that a little bit. I do tend to rest pretty heavy on the hands regardless of where I'm seated on the bike or how the bike is set up for me, even on bikes that are, regardless of the bike. I just tend to put a lot of pressure on my hands. So again, I don't know that that's maybe the bike's fault so much as just mine. So overall, at 6 months with the Seigla, this is the bike I'll continue to be putting miles on once I get it back from the shop. I will not be riding this bike through the winter. I'll find some kind of beater to ride in the snow, but this is by far the nicest bike that I've ever had. So I'll continue on it through the fall, and then as the weather turns, probably in the November timeframe, I'll likely put it away and get it out next year. But really, if I could go and do it all over again, I absolutely would. I might go for the next model down, but even then, I've enjoyed it enough, and I have really no complaints about the overall package. So I see no reason why I wouldn't purchase the bike again. I'll be curious to see how the rest of it feels and continues to hold up as I hit 10,000, 11, potentially even 12 or more thousand miles on the bike. But really no concerns at this point, and I would buy it again. So that is the majority of what I know about the Lauf Seigla. It's seen, as you're seeing go by in my little slideshow here, a lot of gravel, a lot of pavement. It's seen some single track, although I don't think I have any pictures in here. The bike has done, like I said, over 6,000 miles, largely through Kalamazoo County, Berry County, a little bit into Eaton County. It's been into a lot of Calhoun County. So it's seen quite a bit of territory, a lot of stuff, a lot of gravel, a lot of pavement, double track, the Kalamazoo River Valley Trail, the Calhaven Trail, the linear path in Battle Creek, a lot of the dirt roads. So it's been a really enjoyable ride for the summer, and has certainly opened up some opportunities to explore and ride and extend and change routes in ways that I wasn't able to previously on that old Cannondale, and allows me to cover a lot more ground than on my mountain bike. So it's been the right bike for me, so I would certainly recommend it if it's something that you're on the fence about or are looking at or can't decide. I would certainly purchase the Lauf again if I were in the same position, although again, it's kind of the only nice bike I've ever owned, so I don't have a lot to compare it to. But if I think about value for the money and what it's done for me and the amount of miles that I've put on it, I've got nothing to complain about at this point. So would recommend. So thanks for watching.